Welcome to the 51st episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I'm your host, Mark Hasera. For over 24 years, I was in the Air Force as a tanker pilot, flying KC-135s all over the world. My lifelong passion has been airplanes and aviation. Since I was a 5-year-old kid standing on the hood of my Grandpa Andy's car, watching Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8s take off and land out of Los Angeles International Airport, I have loved airplanes. And now for 60 years, airplanes and aviation have been my passion in life. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, aircrew members, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. Our purpose is to investigate some of these tactics, techniques, and procedures these aviators created or cultivated during those extreme and extraordinary military, commercial, and even private flying events and operations. This exploration gives our listeners practical advice on how does the aviation world work and expands critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. But it also gives a lot of our veterans an opportunity to tell their incredible stories. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show is sponsored by Wall Pilot, aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. These are 4, 6, or 8 foot ready to print and even custom vinyl graphics of aircraft that you can peel off and stick to the walls of your home, office, or hangar. A lot of people just frame them the way that they are. But go to wallpilot.com and you can see up to 127 ready to print, or we can do a custom one for you with your name, weapons load, squadron and wing emblems, tail number on a personalized graphic of your airplane. On today's episode of Lessons from the Cockpit, I have somebody I've wanted to interview for a very long time. Bio, F-14 Tomcat Rio. Many of you have probably read his books. Dave Baranek is going to be with us today on the Lessons from the Cockpit show. So, grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show talking about flying Tomcats, instructing in Top Gun, and being in the first movie with my good friend Bio. Dave Baranek, Bio, welcome to the Lessons from the Cockpit show.
Hey, Sluggo, thanks for having me. I've been waiting for a chance to get to be on your program and talk to your audience. You're doing great work here.
Well, I appreciate that, man. But having people like you on, it's like I'm not worthy, You've Tomcat Rio, Top Gun instructor, 3 books out now. I mean, you've done a lot of incredible work. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get your flying bug? How did you get your love for flying and then get into the Navy and start doing it?
As since my books came out and I did have done interviews and stuff, I've thought back about that, and I wish I could think of a specific incident where I got the flying bug. But I think it was just a culmination of growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, and my parents took us to air shows. And in Jacksonville, we had the Blue Angels all the time. The Thunderbirds showed up once in a while. And just around the time I was 10 or 11 years old, something like that, I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I remember before that, I wanted to do different things, or I thought about it. And then once I thought about this fighter pilot, I never changed my mind. That's what took hold at the right age. And I stayed on that path. For years, I wasn't sure whether I went Air Force or Navy or, which one I would want to go till it got time to go to college. And I had to make a decision in terms of ROTC for a ROTC scholarship. And I talked to my dad about it and I ended up going Navy. And for me, I think that was a good decision because as soon as I got to college, my eyesight started to go bad. So there was no way I was going to be a pilot, but I still wanted to fly fighters, and the F-14 was brand new at that time. And so I changed my goal to being an F-14 Rio. As I tell people, no, it's not a fighter pilot, but also it's still challenging and competitive to complete the training and get selected for Tomcats and all that other stuff. And so it was, you don't designate yourself a Rio. You tell the Navy, that's what I want to do. And then they put you through the whole program. And if you meet their standards, whatever. So I became an F-14 Rio. Everything worked out. I put in the time, I had some ability, and it worked out.
Oh man. And you got into the Tomcat community fairly early. The airplanes coming in, the early A models, Phoenix missiles. I mean, the whole works.
When I started my Tomcat training was 1980. So the Tomcat had been in the fleet about 6 years. A lot of the instructors in the RAG, which is the F-14 training squadron, had been, had Vietnam combat flights in the Phantom.
Oh.
Also, a good number of them were in the first few F-14 squadrons. And some of the stories they had, one about the problems they had to figure out, like the Tomcat, like engine problems, but also flap and spoiler things and stuff like that. But also, you probably talked to old guys who flew in the 70s and stuff. The flying that those guys did was amazing. I mean, it was like the Wild West.
And you know what? Even in Strategic Air Command, imagine this. In Strategic Air Command, we could do what's called off-station trainers, and we could like rent a jet for a weekend. And we had a crew that went down to Roosevelt Roads when one of the air wings was doing their workups and was down there refueling at Roosevelt Roads for a week. There was so much stuff you could get away with back then. Oh man, you'd be in jail if you tried now.
Yeah. So, I'm a RAG student and we're listening to these guys talk about all this stuff. And of course, we got the message. It wasn't like that anymore. You couldn't do the things that they talked about, take off and climb overhead Miramar at 10,000 feet and wait to jump people as they took off and stuff like that. You couldn't do that stuff, but still it got you fired up. And it also, those guys, they were enthusiastic, they were warriors, but they were also good trainers. I mean, they told us what we had to do. For me, it was a good time to join Tomcats. But let me tell you something else, Sluggo. My last F-14 fleet experience was in 1998. And the young guys that were coming through then, they had a world of different experience, but they still had the enthusiasm, the professionalism, et cetera. So hopefully, I'm sure you see new Air Force guys now, and maybe Navy and Marine Corps guys, and I hope you see the same thing. They still have that enthusiasm, even though the world is different.
Much different. But yet, you know what? I noticed that they all still, you're right. They have the same kind of enthusiasm. But you know what, too, Bio? They have the same dedication, too.
Yeah.
The same dedication to the mission, particularly now because we don't fight wars. The Air Force doesn't just go off and do its thing. It's joint. It's all about jointness, okay?
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's one of the other key things that has become a great attribute of the military is we know how to do the joint thing now. And we were kind of forced into it, and I can remember being at the KOC during Allied Force, and we're like looking at each other going, okay, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And
I agree with you. I think you hit the nail on the head. Vietnam, there was very little inter-service interaction. And then, as you said, we were forced into it. And I think we do it pretty well now, in my experience.
I talked to a guy, Spliff Russell, who was in an F-15E Strike Eagle covering a SEAL team on top of Tacker Gar. He was covering Roberts Ridge, had never fired the gun at a ground target, and had never done a close air support mission until he was forced into it. And yet he said, our guys are in trouble and we're here to help.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it. Yep. And I think that's one of the joint things that we've all come to realize now is this is the way we're going to fight. So you cover your training in your first book, before Top Gun days. Talk to us a little bit about what a Rio goes through in his or her initial training, as you are going through school and then getting an assignment to Tomcats.
Okay. We called it flight school back when I went through in 1979 and 80, which was in the last century. The reason I'm saying that is because at that time, they did not teach backseaters how to fly an airplane. I don't know if they do that at all right now because there's no real point in it. You understood how to fly an airplane because we went to aerodynamics class and all these other things. They didn't teach us how to do the stick and throttle thing though. But on the other hand, we were flying in training airplanes that had dual controls. And so oftentimes an instructor would say, do you want to fly for a few minutes? And so you would get a little bit of stick time, especially depending on how your training flight went. But the syllabus when I was there started with basic airways navigation, And then it went to things like low-level navigation. And this was all before GPS. So we had to use TAC-ins, and then we had to use visual navigation out the window and charts and everything. And I thought these were all good skills. And then you moved into the Rio training squadron, where they taught you all kinds of different air intercepts on a basic radar. And so we had simulators and we had training aircraft. So that the progression, though, was lecture, simulator, aircraft. To do the stuff that I just told you, airways navigation, low levels, and radar intercepts and stuff, and then a little bit of maneuvering combat. That took, I'm thinking back in about 10 to 11 months. At that point, Rio got his wings and went off to the F-14 training squadron, where they continued to train you on the mission as well as on the aircraft. And I'll say something else, because people may wonder, what's a Rio like in a squadron? Every stage of the training, from Pensacola to my very last flight in the F-14, the Rio had to have the same systems knowledge as the pilot. When we took our NATOPS tests, which is, I guess that's your -1. And we had boldface procedures. The Rio had to know every single word of boldface procedures exactly like a pilot did. He had to know the aircraft engine limit, hydraulic pressure, and hundreds of other things. The Rio took the same test. So in that case, I thought the Navy did a good job, because they made the Rio, responsible crewmen. Okay. You weren't just sitting back there waiting to, for the mission. You were part of the crew. And so I appreciated that.
And in the F-14, and the way it has been discussed with me, the Rio is who runs the mission. What was it? Somebody told me once, the pilot rows the boat, but the Rio shoots the ducks. That's pretty good. I would say that is maybe a little bit of a generalization, because there were times when I would be flying and the pilot would be the mission commander or the strike leader. Yeah, good point.
So in that case, the pilot would do a lot of that. But the Rio was doctrinally responsible for navigation and communication. And so, he did a lot of running the mission. But as just like Air Force pilots, many Navy pilots are single seaters. Tomcat pilots could easily be single seaters, so they can navigate and communicate. But in the F-14, they had a Rio to do that. Yeah. So that was the Rio's job. The Rio had the lead for that. It was really a cool aircrew concept, shared responsibility. It was a great environment if it worked well.
Yeah.
There were a few guys that, were hard to get along with, whatever. But they're the exceptions, Sluggo, just like on any crew.
Oh, and looking back at my career, I went through the same thing. Okay. There was people you liked and people you loved, as we used to say.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Yeah, that's
people
good.
You liked and people you loved, crews that you loved flying with. And it was just a thrill to come into work and fly with a particular crew. But, and you got to see the F-14 evolve from being air superiority to actually dropping bombs, didn't you?
That is something that, I couldn't believe it when it actually happened, because when we were strictly air-to-air, air superiority, oh, good. And this is going to lead me to a comment, which I'll make after the evolution thing. When we were air to air, we were, I don't know, maybe like F-15C guys. It's like, air to ground, the bomb always hits the ground. What's the hard part? And that, derisive remarks and stuff like that. When the community went air to ground, I'll tell you what, they embraced it. And they wanted to do the job professionally. They accepted the challenge. And so it was, it's very professional. So you used a correct term for the F-14, air superiority. I go online sometimes on Facebook and every once in a while you'll see someone make the declaration that the Tomcat, remember the Tomcat was designed for fleet air defense, or was designed as an interceptor. And I engage a lot of those people and I say that's demonstrably not true. And if you look back at Grumman, you look back at the Navy's requirements and specifications, you look back at Grumman's material, the Tomcat was the Navy's air superiority fighter. It had to be able to do the fleet air defense interceptor mission, but it was the strike escort fighter, it was the MiG sweep fighter, and it had every lesson from Vietnam that they could incorporate in the airframe. So, it was an air superiority fighter when it started.
And nobody.
So, thanks for using that term.
And it was great at what it did. And
yeah,
I got to fly the D model sim at Oceana with a Rio by the name of Rob Osterhout, Wimbo. He showed me all the different things that, the D model could do. Of course, it had a different radar and stuff like that, but holy smokes, man. Launching a Phoenix missile at a target 90 miles away. Okay. And I remember being part of an exercise that we did with Carrier Air Wing 5 when I was stationed at Kadena.
Yeah.
And the very first thing that the F-15 guys put in the rule book for our combined exercise, F-14s can't use Phoenix. That was the very first thing. They go, no, you can't use that. You can't use that. And it was like, that's what they do.
It depends on what the purpose of the exercise is and stuff like that. Because I remember when I was a junior officer, we hosted an F-15 squadron. I don't even remember which one it was. The last day, we said the only weapon, it's guns only.
Oh.
And so, because we said, hey, come on, let's mix it up. And even way back then, the F-15 guys, they ran great intercepts. They had great SA. And so as a Rio, this is my job, but I'm listening to these F-15 pilots. I'm going like, man, these guys are pretty good, And part of that, I'll tell you the reasons I think that they were good. Part of it was they had a good radar with medium PRF process.
Yeah.
The F-14A radar required a lot of operator attention and it to do its best job. And another part was Air Force training. I learned as I worked when I went to Top Gun, and we had our first Air Force exchange officer, Captain Mike Strait, call sign BOA. He had, a high level of execution. And I think while all these Navy guys at Top Gun, we were capable and professional, but I think BOA helped us to improve our intercept game.
Uh-huh.
And so did some of the new Hornet guys. And again, at the time, it pained me as an F-14 Rio to get these tips from these guys. But I'm going, well, I know a good idea when I see one. And on the other hand, the Navy did. The Navy stepped up, and in my opinion, the Navy improved its execution greatly in terms of intercepts. Boy, I'll tell you what, I could be pissing off a whole lot of people by going down this line of commentary.
But you know what? That's what starts conversations, man. You know that? It doesn't matter if you like it or don't like it.
Well, and that's my opinion. And every once in a while, Sluggo, I do talk to somebody and they go, Bio, you forgot this, or remember this, and go like, oh yeah, okay, you're right. So, I don't mind admitting, oh yeah, I forgot that.
Yeah, but look at the transition that the F-14 made, because I remember during this exercise that we had with CAG-5, we had a live drop range at Kadena that people would come down and use, and that was one of the big things that they wanted to do, was because this was in 94, 95 timeframe, and they were just starting to drop bombs off of Tomcats.
Yep.
And so a wall of Eagles was set up in front of them. They'd have to fight their way through. They'd go in, drop their bombs, turn around, fight the Eagles on the way out. And they were loving life. Matter of fact, the battle group admiral. Yeah, exactly. That's great training. And matter of fact, the battle group admiral says, we got to do this again. And we were using the North Korean ROE. And we got to exercises and figure out, hey, there's a hole here, there's a hole here, there's a hole here. We got to plug.
Yeah.
The two Tomcat squadrons were the Black Knights and the Lancers.
Yeah, 21 and 154. Those. Yeah. And see, when you say Air Wing 5, any Navy guy or Tomcat guy knows that's the Air Wing that was based in Japan and still is. Since probably the late 1970s. It's a forward-based air wing.
And again, we did something that had never been done before, where we brought the whole battle group down.
Uh-huh.
And one of the guys at CAG-5, one of the CAG-5 strike leads is going, We've never done this before. I said, well, here's our 17 training objectives. What do you guys want to do? And they're going, 17? You got 17? I go, yeah, here they are. Look. And they go, can we put this in? And can we put this in? Can we put this in? And we said, absolutely. Let's come down and do it. And so for 4 days, we fought this air campaign, CAG 5 as obviously Orange Air bad guy for us, but we were bad guy for them. And they'd have to fight through a bunch of F-15s, drop their bombs, and then fight their way back out. And it was great training, because here's the other thing. Some of the brand new nuggets and LTs in the air wing had never plugged into a KC-135 and got to do it for the first time.
Sure.
And got to do it for the first time.
Yeah.
I told them, you guys can have 3 KC-135s during the day. Whenever you guys need them, you just tell us when you want them to launch, and they're on station time. And that was one of the other things the battle group admiral said, holy smokes, this is a terrific training. We got to do this again. And I left before we got a chance to do it again. But
so that was 94, 95?
Yeah. And the other thing that we did too, Bio, is we brought the Rios and the pilots from the F-18 squadrons and the F-14 squadrons to Kadena, and they got to fly in the backseat of the 15s. And the 15 pilots got to go out to the boat, the carrier.
No, I'm good.
I know. I got to be careful using that term. They don't like boat, but they got to go out to the carrier and fly in the F-14, in the backseat of the F-14. And they all came back and saying, man, I've got a different appreciation for how these guys do their work.
Good.
I think that's where that interoperability lesson learned comes from, is doing work like that and doing things like that. Oh, the other thing, the F-15s were simulating cruise missiles, and we're trying to get at the carrier through the Aegis screen.
Yeah.
I think one guy got through during the 4 days. All right?
Interesting. That
was humbling to them. Okay.
Oh, that's good.
And we told the F-14s that when we were doing the cruise missile stuff, that they could use Phoenix. Okay. And all of the 15 guys came back and were humbled by how that turned out, because they thought, I'm going to go at 50 feet. I'm going to, at the Mach 50 feet and everything like that. Got wasted before they got within 30 miles.
Yeah. Yep.
And they all had this greater appreciation of how you do fleet defense. Okay. So
good. Everybody learned something.
Yeah, they really did. Okay. So describe for our listeners, when you talk about fleet defense, what does that mean? And how is it done?
This is a case where back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, the high level threat was the Soviet Union, and waves of bombers accompanied by jammers, and the bombers carrying cruise missiles that could fly 200 miles or more. And so, and when I say waves of bombers, I think it was probably 18 was a small raid or something like that. And and of course we didn't know exactly when they would attack. We didn't think, we would know exactly when. We'd have some kind of tipper information and what indications and stuff. And so the plan was to set up a big defensive grid of Tomcats out on station, waiting for the bombers to show up. And the Tomcats would probably have, realistically, they probably have 4 Phoenix missiles, because you could probably just bring 4 back to the ship.
Yeah.
And you might have a few Tomcats out there. You might run through a few cycles before the bombers showed up. So you may not shoot any of those Phoenix, but they would be out. I'm reluctant to talk about actual distances, but, you'd have, half a dozen Tomcats out beyond 100 miles, hundreds of miles, depending on the exact posture and situation. And they'd be out there on station orbiting and looking and waiting for tipper information. And then, so when we're practicing this, or not waiting for tipper information, I'm sorry, waiting for the first contact. And one of the hardest things about practicing this was discipline in terms of maintaining station and keeping them with enough gas to respond to the threat and return to the carrier. And this was something that I taught. This was one of my side projects when I was a Top Gun instructor, because in the 80s and starting in the 70s, Top Gun had a carrier air defense, a small carrier air defense program. Most of the Top Gun school was air to air, close in air combat and air intercepts, but they they did address the carrier air defense mission. And I was on that team. I think all Rios were on that team. And so we would teach fleet guys, how to defend the carrier, and we put them in simulators and we run them against these very challenging scenarios, things that you could not duplicate in real life. That's why we did it in the simulator, because you couldn't get that many targets and that many jammers out there in real life. So we'd run these guys in the simulator, and then when I would debrief them, every once in a while somebody would say, oh, this is a doomsday mission. If I need to do whatever it takes to run out, to shoot down the bombers, and if I run out of gas, that's the way it goes. And I go, I don't think so. Yeah. There's only 20, 22 Tomcats on that carrier, and you don't know if the war is going to last, 6 hours or 6 weeks. But you don't want to start. It's not like, Grumman Hellcats where they were rolling off the assembly line 50 per day. You don't want to start dumping Tomcats in the ocean on the first, at the first mission. So I go, you need to get out there, do the job, and bring that plane back to the carrier. It was a complex mission. It was difficult to train to, and thank goodness we never had to do it for real.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah. And I remember being up there at Top Gun and going through their syllabus and seeing some of the things that they had some pretty scary comments about intercepting Bear bombers. Was that something you got to experience? You got to get up close to a Bear bomber? You did.
Yeah, almost everybody did. I actually, being a Pacific Fleet guy, I made 5 deployments, and they were all in the Pacific. And one of the downsides, if there was one, was that we did not see quite the level of Soviet. Again, this was back in the 80s. It was Soviet. Yeah. We didn't see the level of Soviet bombers that a lot of Atlantic Fleet guys saw. But I did see. I think I saw at least one Bear, maybe a couple of Bears. I saw a lot of IL-38 Mays, which were frankly, they got boring really fast. But the cool part about it was when you're briefing these guys, of course, being a new Rio, I had a more experienced pilot, and they put new pilots with more experienced Rios. And so there would always be stories. There would always be, somebody in the crew had probably seen a Bear before, and they would say, be careful with these guys. Don't let them put you in a box. When you're escorting them, watch their airspeed, watch what they do, because you'll be flying wing on them and they'll be pulling the throttles back. So you may join up on them and they're doing 300 knots indicated or something like that. And then pretty soon they're going, 280, 260. Pretty soon you're on the verge of stall. I mean, 260 is not a Tomcat stall speed, but it's starting to get slow. And then they would say, watch out, because they'll make a hard turn into you. And while you're trying to avoid them, then you'll depart your airplane. And so we were always wary of them. And I didn't see any guys do any, mean things like that when I was on them. But over the years, there were reports that it did happen. And so you had to be careful, but also there's some excitement going like, hey, this is our actual enemy. Those guys in there, they're Soviet bomber pilots. Sometimes carriers would try to deceive them by using either an unusual route, because, most carriers leaving the United States went either to Pearl Harbor and then the Philippines, or went from San Diego to the Philippines, and they, steamed a Great Circle route, plus or minus. But every once in a while, you would use deceptive tactics to try to make the carrier hard to find. And over the years, there were stories of, Soviets being unable to find a carrier or having a hard time finding it or whatever. So every once in a while, things would get more serious. And that's kind of fun, being a young lieutenant, playing real world games.
Yeah, and seeing a real world enemy.
Yeah.
What that must have been like the first time. I would have thought, man, that would send chills down your spine. Wow, this is the guy
it was very cool. Away. It was very cool. And the things that you remember are they told you make a lot of notes. So I'm sitting there writing things down, like numbers on the airplanes. Then I had the intelligence center. They'd give us their big clunky camera, and you're taking pictures of everything with their camera. You're tracking, either the E2 or the carrier is always tracking where you are, what's going on. And so it's a very busy time when you're escorting an enemy airplane around a carrier. because, if he starts to come close to the carrier starts, getting all excited. And it's just, it was fun. It was, it did jazz you up. And my recollection is my first one, the guy came down and we knew he was coming for hours ahead of time. And I launched on a regular scheduled event. Mm-hmm. But the most exciting way to launch would be an Alert 5 launch, where you're sitting on the flight deck and all of a sudden they say, launch the Alert Fighters or launch the Alert 5. Man, you start up the plane. Everybody starts running around on the flight deck and stuff. We could get airborne in about 5 minutes or a little less than 5 minutes back then. And that was just a heck of a way to begin a flight. And it was a test of everything you knew. It was a test of, your systems knowledge, your carrier operations procedures and everything. And it was a heck of a lot of fun. Sluggo, I say it was a heck of a lot of fun. Go ahead. I'll let you ask the question. But.
Well, it was like being on Nuclear Alert and Strategic Air Command in my tanker, man.
I'll bet.
We're going to get airborne in basically 5 minutes with 6 nuclear armed FB-111s coming up behind us, heading to wherever. It's the same kind of thrill. Okay. And
I remember
exercise this a lot.
I think you had one chapter in your book where you went into detail about that. And that was very exciting. You made that very exciting.
I've had people call me, go, you didn't really launch, did you? No, we didn't. And there's a little blurb at the very end of that chapter that, I say, hey, this actually happened this way, but we didn't launch.
Yeah.
But we had a Soviet sub that was up close and we were on runway alert, No,
that was good.
And so I understand that excitement that you get when you're in the airplane, all of a sudden you're flipping switches and you're taxiing up to the cat and off you go, and you're listening to, okay, where am I going? How am I getting there? And of course, gas is always an issue, and it was just one of those things that I understand the excitement of 5 minute alert on the carrier deck because we went through the same thing in SAC.
Yeah, it was a good test. And what I was going to say, the reason I say it was fun is because I remember thinking this about some of the stuff I faced when I was a student at the Top Gun class. Yeah. I was trained and prepared to face this. So I remember sitting there, sitting on station with one of 2 F-14s. So my pilot and I and our wingman, and we know there's going to be 4, 6 or more fighters out there. We didn't feel any trepidation. We're sitting there going like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'm going to pat you on the back, but I'm going to punch you in the face at the same time.
It was awesome.
I met my wife during that time period. Okay. And a lot of people ask me, well, how did you meet your wife? And I said, I met her at a party I didn't want to go to. I stood her up on our first date and our courtship involved nuclear weapons. And it was an incredible time to be in the military. Incredible time, particularly during the Reagan era.
Yeah.
We were getting all kinds of new systems and new airplanes and look at us now. We're still flying those same airplanes.
Okay. It's funny you mentioned your wife because I met my wife. Top Gun class started on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
I met my wife the Thursday before Top Gun class started.
How did you meet her?
Met her in a bar.
Did you?
Yeah.
Down
one
in
of my
San
buddies.
Diego?
Yeah. Of all the times. And so for the next 5 weeks, we were dating and spent a lot of time together, and I was going to Top Gun class every day. So my life was full.
Oh, man.
At that time.
So you're going through this intense syllabus, and then at night you're spending time with your future wife. That's pretty incredible.
Oh, it was cool.
I'll bet. But,
let's see, that was 1982. I had just turned 24.
That's awesome. And see, I don't talk about what the wives experience a lot on the podcast, obviously, but every once in a while, it's really cool to find out, okay, how did you meet your wife? And of course, you're going on these long deployments and you've got little babies at home and you're going to be gone for 6 months or something like that,
Yeah.
At least we'd come home like in 80 days. You guys would be out forever. And mom's at home basically raising the family and you're talking to her maybe on the phone every once in a while. It's completely different for you folks in the Navy.
Well, and I'll tell you what, when we dated, there was no email, and a letter took 10 days to get back and forth. And, maybe we're both independent or something, but we both adjusted to that. We go, oh, that's fine.
We dated I met her in August. We got married the following March. And during that time period, I was going on alert, and we were doing off-station trainers too.
Man, I waited 2 years before I asked my wife, because I go, several of my buddies are getting married, and I go, I don't want to just do it because everybody expects me to do it. So I waited, and she goes, I was getting tired of you waiting.
No, we didn't. There's a 10-year age difference between my wife and I. She was 19 and I was 29 when we met. There was a lot of eyebrows raised when they saw that. We've been married for 34 years now, so 35 years. So it's all good.
The funny thing is, we've been married. Yeah, we've been married. Now your audience is going, what's this talk? We've been married 35 years, but my wife is still 29 years old. So I can't figure that out. So
yeah, so is mine. So tell our listeners how you get chosen for Top Gun, because everybody sees the movie, and we'll talk about the movie here in a little bit. They're standing in front of CAG, after getting in trouble, and you two are going to Top Gun because somebody else turned in their wings. I'm sure that's not how that happens.
For many years, the squadron commander selected who he wanted to send to Top Gun as a student. And so he would normally pick his a good pilot in Rio, and pilot in Rio who had a good prospect of coming back to the squadron and training the other air crews, because that was the Top Gun model for many years. Yeah. And so when I was, when I was a junior officer, my commanding officer, I was his Rio, which in this case worked out well. He selected me to go through Top Gun, and he selected one of the other junior pilots. Now, being his Rio, if I did a crappy job or whatever, it would not have worked out well. But things worked out well. So he selected me and one of the junior pilots, and we went through the Top Gun class. Later in that turnaround, our squadron actually got a second quota. And so he picked, another pilot in Rio, and they went through the Top Gun class also. So then, again, this is back in the old days, and I didn't know this. I didn't know this until I became an instructor, but Top Gun was looking at the pilots in Rios that went through, and they made notes at the end of the class. Who would we like to have come back as an instructor? And so they kept their list, which was very secret. And if you, just expressed an interest, is the way it happened for me. I went back and I just got an itch in my brain about a month after I went through the Top Gun class. I was going, I wonder if I could go back there and be an instructor. So I asked one of the former instructors in our squadron. I'll tell you this detail. He told me, he goes, well, Bio, he goes, what did they say to you when you graduated? So I thought back to the graduation ceremony, and after the end of the graduation ceremony, there's a small formal ceremony, and then the instructors and the students went through. It's similar to baseball team when you're a little kid, shaking hands at the end of the game. Yeah. You have two lines. So at the end of the ceremony, we shook hands with a lot of the instructors, and several instructors said, well, Bio, if you want to come back as an instructor, just let us know. And I hadn't even given that a second thought, because I'm going, I thought they were just saying that to be nice. but when this guy said, well, what did they say to you when you graduated? I told him this, and he goes, well, you ought to go over and talk to him then. Yeah. So I went over and talked to him, and I went over to the squadron and talked to the squadron, the Top Gun CO and another Rio who was there. And they said, they go, if you want to come here as an instructor, what you have to do is change your officer preference card, which was our request, what we wanted to do in our next job, and then get your Tomcat squadron CO to write a letter of recommendation. And so I did that. That started the process. And then, when it was my turn to rotate, I ended up joining Top Gun as an instructor. And the reason I don't mind telling you all this is that the entire process has become much more formalized, Sluggo. And which I think is good for the Navy. And it's described in Brad Elward's big giant book, Top Gun, The Legacy. He goes into great detail about how Top Gun instructors are chosen and all of that. And it's a lot more formal than it used to be. which again, I think that's a good idea as in the big picture.
Yeah. See, weapons school is a selection process, putting in a package with recommendations. And, I was on the initial cadre. Actually, I staffed the package to create the KC-135 school, and nobody wanted us. Nobody, particularly Air Combat Command, which runs the weapons school.
Yeah,
and
of course, because it's something different, something new.
Yeah. Why would we want Air Mobility Command airplanes to be part of this? And I don't know if you know this now, they actually have a space school and an intercontinental ballistic missile squadron in the weapons school. I mean, it has expanded like crazy, much to our credit. Okay?
Yeah. Some people may dismiss or, it's fun to make fun of those things. But if you look at the essentials of why a weapons school succeeds, not only Top Gun, but the Air Force Fighter Weapons School has, very successful. If you look at the essentials and you distill them and redirect them, and you can apply them to a different situation, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not? Yeah.
So I got to ask you,
okay,
how did you guys find out that Top Gun, the movie, was coming to you? And what did you guys think when you were told, hey, you're going to be part of a movie?
Okay, I'll be real honest with you because it's so funny. So the movie is based on an article that was in California Magazine in, I think it was 1983. And the entire article, I worked with, the article is about a pilot and Rio going through the Top Gun class as students. And I worked with that pilot a few years ago, and we put the article on my website, topgunbio.com. So if you go on to topgunbio.com and look in the table of contents on the right, it says, the original article or something like that.
I've read the article. It's pretty good.
Yeah, it is. It is a good article.
It's a good article.
Well, I didn't read it back then because I saw it in the magazine because, California Magazine was on bookshelves and everybody talked about it. And I go, why would I waste my time reading this? I did it. But I read it a few years ago when the guy sent it to me and we worked on it. And I go, oh, this is a very good article. So the two producers, Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, they saw that magazine and they were inspired by the article. And they started a process that took almost 2 years to do all the preparation and get the Navy's approval. And so the first time I heard about it was in early 1985, a few months into 1985, people started saying, and there wasn't a lot of talk about it. I heard a little bit of murmur. There's gonna be a movie about Top Gun, or there's gonna be a movie about Miramar. Well, and I'm thinking, it's not gonna be a big deal. It's not gonna have much to do with me. And there had already been, some scenes filmed, like from other movies and TV shows, and they didn't make any big impact. So it's like, whatever, this will be just the next splash in the puddle. So then these guys show up, we start to get the sense, oh, this is a big deal project. And so, pretty soon it's there. People start showing up asking, or when I say people, I mean writers. Writers start showing up and asking us questions. A few actors showed up now and then, but when Tom Cruise came on base, we were going like, Tom Cruise was he? He was in All the Right Moves or so. I mean, he wasn't a star. And everybody, I knew Michael Ironsides from the TV show V, and I had forgotten that Tom Skerritt was in MASH. So, that they weren't major stars. Suddenly, everybody shows up, and then we start going, okay, next month we're going to plan to film, and people start making preparations and things are really happening. And then I'm going like, okay, this is really here. But again, I had no concept that it would even be a successful movie, much less a hit.
I don't think anybody did, Bio.
Yeah. And that was good.
A Navy movie about airplanes? Huh? What?
You know what? That made life simple.
How so?
There were no expectations. There was no pressure. Nobody really worried about, I took my camera up a few times and took a few pictures. I talked to guys that were involved in making the new movie, which, by the way, I think the new movie is great. They did a very nice job. But guys said that we were supposed to leave our cell phones, at the gate when we came onto the base or various things like that. And, I helped them to fly in the movie, but I can't say anything about it. And just like, whatever. Okay, fine. And there was so much expectations with the new movie. But when we made ours, it was like, simple.
Oh, I know.
But still, the Paramount people, from the cameramen, the sound men, they were very professional and they tried to do a good job. And I think, that helped to make it a good movie because it's a high quality movie.
Oh, it really is.
The original. Going back to the original.
So I got to tell you something funny about that. All right. I was wearing a Top Gun hat when I met my wife. Okay. An F-14, I build plastic model planes, and an F-14 Tomcat kit came with a hat in it. It wasn't the hat like you guys wore, okay, with the light blue and everything, okay? But I had it on.
I know that hat. I still have, I think I have a box of that F-14 model kit.
Yeah, that's it.
Sitting somewhere. This is the F5.
Yeah.
And the reason, and I remember when this one has a Top Gun patch offer on the back of it. And the reason I have this is because Testers Model Corporation used some of my photos.
Oh, wow.
And they sent me several models, and my name's on the back of the box. Photos from Lieutenant Dave Baranek. So you got your Top Gun hat.
I had my Top Gun hat on at the party. I met my wife, and she and her girlfriend looked and said, "Oh, this guy doesn't fly airplanes. This guy, what a loser, what a wannabe, a Top Gun wannabe." Of course, she asked one of my friends, what does he do? He's wearing that stupid Top Gun hat. Oh, he's a garbage man, for crying out loud. He goes around, collects people's garbage. That's exactly what Sammy said to him. Okay. On our first date, I remember I told you, I stood her up on our first date Friday night. I called her Saturday morning. I said, "Hey, I'll come get you and we'll do something. I won't drive you to New York." We were living in Boston at the time, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Yeah. I won't drive you to New York, but we'll go do something. It took me 2 hours to find her house because there's no GPS.
Right.
There's no cell phones. Okay.
Right.
So I finally get to the house and everything. And I go, "Well, what would you like to do?" She goes, "I want to see your airplane." I said, "Okay," not thinking anything of it. And during the ride back up to Portsmouth to the base, I realized she doesn't believe I fly airplanes. She doesn't believe I fly airplanes. Okay.
That's funny. Yeah.
So I go on base, of course. And remember, we had the stickers in the window. And the guard salutes, and she goes, "Why did he do that?" And I said, "Well, I'm an officer." "Well, how can he tell?" "Well, the sticker right here in the window." And I took her to the maintenance hangar. The DCM, the colonel, the 06 for maintenance on the base, was walking out with his wife and his in-laws. And he said, "Hey, believe it, Valerie, I flew with him last week." And he says, "Hey, isn't your tail number 8887? I go, "Yeah." And he smiles, "Take her to the other side." And there it was. It was all taken apart, but 8887 was there. And I walked around to the right side of the airplane. I didn't even look up. I just pointed. I said, "Not only do I fly airplanes, I've got my name on one."
Yeah.
Okay. And she kissed me on the first date on the airplane.
Nice.
But I had one of those Top Gun hats on from one of the model kits.
If only it was always that simple, huh?
Oh man. Yeah. Only if it was that simple, But
okay, I got a story about a name on an airplane, but this is about my mom. When my mom came out to San Diego early in my career, I showed her my name on an F-14, and they painted Lieutenant J.G. Dave Baranek. And I showed my mom. I go, "Mom, look, my name is on an F-14." And she goes, "Your name is David, not Dave." I go, "Thanks, Mom. Got it."
Yeah. Thanks for bringing me down, Mom.
So for the rest of my career, whenever they painted my name on an airplane, I told them to be sure to paint David on it. So,
but see, it's the funny little stories. It's the funny little stories like that, that make aviation so cool. Your name is not Dave; it's David, my son. How many flights did you go up on during the actual filming of the movie where you're one of the MiGs?
Oh, I've got that. Yes, as a backseater at Top Gun, I only flew one type of airplane. We had the only two-seaters we had was the F-5F. What we also had single-seat A4 Skyhawks, but Top Gun didn't have any two-seaters. The adversary squadrons did, but Top Gun didn't. We had single-seat A4 Skyhawks, and then we had single-seat and two-seat F-5s. I flew in the F-5F. When they painted them up for the movie, they painted 3 single-seaters and 1 two-seater. They painted those black. And so I flew in that 2-seat F-5F 3 times to film flights for the movie. And I've got my logbooks over there, and I actually went into my logbook and I wrote Top Gun movie after those 3 flights. So that was one little note that that I did realize, okay, maybe we're doing something interesting. But on one of those flights, we filmed where we were the so-called MiG-28, and Maverick was inverted above us, and we looked up.
That was you?
Yeah, that was me. now they had filmed that scene earlier, but they said they weren't happy with it. And so I think that's me in the movie doing that. And then on another one of those, and then we did some other stuff. We did tail chase where we're chasing the F-14. We had like all 4 of the black F-5s out there, and everybody had an altitude band. And so we're just weaving back and forth behind the Tomcat, and the Tomcat's behind the Learjet. And so that was, that was kind of interesting. None of this flying was as demanding, as dynamic as a regular Top Gun flight, but it was just kind of cool just being out there, filming a movie, flying around a Learjet and worrying about that stuff.
But you guys had to brief this like crazy, didn't you? Because obviously Bruckheimer's trying to choreograph all of the scenes, and you're going to have to follow his script. The briefings and the debriefings must have been incredible for this.
So it was a multi-stage process. They had the script, written, and that was the work of multiple people. And the Top Gun liaison officer, Rat Willard, he had a lot of input into the script, as did several other Navy officers. So then when they were doing the flying scenes, Rat and Bozo Abel, I think, was involved in this, would get together with the director, Tony Scott, and they would talk out the flying scenes. And Tony had drawn storyboards. And Tony is a good artist besides being a film director. He was able to draw these detailed images to show the camera angles that he wanted and the action and stuff. So then Rat and Bozo would translate it into executable maneuvers. And then we would brief them. Then it became a regular flight brief, takeoff time, radio frequency, operating area. And then they'd use the models and the whiteboard, and they'd say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is okay, Rat and Bio, you're going to fly by the Learjet, and they're going to film you looking up. And while they're doing that, the other MiGs are going to be hanging out with the F-14 just out of the way. Then we're going to break up, and the 2 F-14s are going to go to the west, and the MiGs are going to go to the east, and we're going to do head-on passes. So, it was a regular flight brief, and I would write down, first event, second event, and all that. As I said, it wasn't as dynamic as a Top Gun training flight, but when we did things like those head-on passes, we flew much closer than we would during a training flight. So we were flying, head-on to the Tomcats, and we're passing by around 100 feet separation. It was very close, very exciting. And then
that's not in the training rules.
Well, you know how we rationalize that? Yeah, the training rules is 500 feet.
Yeah.
And we did that first, and Tony Scott goes, oh, that's too far. You're just going to be a spec. Well, we said, well, we're not doing a dynamic ACM training flight. We're doing a closely choreographed, filming flight. But still, Sluggo, nobody wants to get killed filming a darn movie.
Yeah.
Or break a jet doing that. And so, some of the other, they then went up to Fallon to film the Top Gun class flights. And those guys had to fly low, fly near the camera. And that was also very challenging because they were because of the speeds and altitudes they were flying at. But they got some great footage.
Oh, yeah. When those F-14s are flying over that like rocky outcropping, the big spikes like that. Oh, my gosh. That was some yeah. That was some incredible footage. Okay.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah.
So finally, they wrap all this up and make a movie out of it. And you got to go to the premiere, didn't you? You and your wife got to go to the premiere, didn't you?
We went to the West Coast benefit premiere. There was some premiere in Washington, I think. So they had to, honor the Navy admirals who supported the project and stuff like that. That's fine. So then they had a West Coast benefit premiere in San Diego, and tickets were $50 per person. And, I don't know about you, but when I was a lieutenant, that was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money.
Why would I want to pay? So anyway, Hughes Aircraft bought tickets for all the Top Gun instructors. So that was very nice. So we all went and we rented limos. We went and sat in a group. It seemed like most of NAS Miramar was there. I mean, a lot of people were there. The theater was packed. They cranked the sound way up. It was just, I don't remember much about the evening. It was but it was a big event. Then we went to a big party at a hotel a couple of blocks away. And then the next day, I could look in my little book, but the next day, at least this happened when I went up to Hollywood, I had to be at work at 7 a.m. It's like, hey, real life goes on. And your movie came out, but Top Gun training needs to get done.
Yeah, we got students here.
Yeah.
But that must have been so much fun to be part of that.
It was fun. And we had, a steady stream of magazines and entertainment this week or whatever the program was called, and TV news shows, some national, some local. They came by the squadrons and So and that was kind of fun. My fellow instructors, I will give them credit because we would swap stories about this when people would complete their interview or whatever. And everyone tried to be professional. They knew that they were representing the Top Gun and the Navy and U.S. military. And they would say, the interviewer tried to get me to say this. And we'd all, make a face and they go, I'm not going to say that, Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's no love lost in the military and the media in some places, isn't there?
Well, back in 1986, I think things changed after Gulf War I.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
The media still has a potential adversary relationship, but in 86, Top Gun was really like one of the first, as you said earlier when we were talking about the movie. It's like, what, a movie about the military, about airplanes? Who cares about that? And so it was one of the first, big interactions between military and media. I mean, not the only one, but it was one of the few.
Oh, it was huge, man. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing somebody with Top Gun gear on. Top Gun hats, Top Gun shirts, Top Gun sweatshirts, model airplanes, for crying out loud,
I remember walking around Oceana, NAS Oceana. I was there on a training for like 2 weeks to give training. And I was just wearing a Top Gun squadron shirt because we wore them now and then. And I remember walking around the Navy Exchange and this little kid goes, "Mommy, look, that man's in Top Gun." His mother said, "Son, these days everybody's in Top Gun." Boy. I didn't even bother to go, no, really, I am. But it's like, just let it go.
I know. It's like my wife. No, you don't really fly airplanes. Well, yeah, actually I do. So you write a book about Top Gun days. Tell my listeners how that thought came into your mind to write a book.
If I had thought about this, if I even had any inkling that I would write a book back in the day, I would have taken twice as many photos and twice as many notes. But I never, I didn't give it any thought. But after I retired, it would have been probably a year after I retired. Yeah. I remember driving home from work and I was thinking, I'm going to write a magazine article about filming the Top Gun movie. And then within a minute, as I was thinking about it, I go, I'm going to write a book. And I went home and I told my wife, and she goes, "That's a good idea." Because she goes, you need a hobby. So that Sluggo, and I'll say this for the benefit of anyone in your audience who is thinking about writing a book. It took me a total of almost 3 years to write this book. Now, I look back and I saved each chapter as a separate file. I look back at the dates. During that 3 years, I took a couple of breaks. For example, I wrote the first 3 chapters and then I took 6 months off. And what I did during that time is I was looking for a publisher. And then I said, you know what? I need to get back to work. So I wrote more. Then I kind of hit a block. I took 3 more months off and then I finished the book. Well, then it took a couple more years to get a literary agent. So it, for me, was a long process. I got a lot of rejections. And part of it was, as my agent said, when I finally got a literary agent, he goes, "Why didn't you write this 20 years ago? You could have, it would have been perfect." There were, I talked to the Naval Institute, the people that put out proceedings, and the Naval Institute Press. They were very gracious to look at my manuscript, and they said, "This doesn't fit any of our categories." And I heard that from another aviation publisher also. They said, if your book was about Vietnam or about not the Cold War, Vietnam, World War II, or, this was by now is in 2005, 2006. They go, if it was about the war in Afghanistan or Iraq, we'd pick it up right away. But you're writing about the Cold War. And they go, nobody's reading those books. So I had a hard time getting a publisher, but I finally did.
Yeah. And you've written 2 more since then.
Well, that's something else I wasn't sure I would do. I wrote Top Gun Days. I felt good about that. And then another author, Wolfgang Samuel. Do you know Wolfgang Samuel? He's a former Air Force navigator who I used to do book signings with at Smithsonian. He goes, "Dave, he's written like 7 or 8 books, and they're very good books." He goes, "Dave, you need more than 1 book." So people used to ask me how I got started in the business. And so I wrote before Top Gun Days, which was about the training and stuff like that. And just realizing that, wait a minute, I kicked something down here. I'm good. Just realizing that, training may not be exciting enough. I do include several stories from the fleet in before Top Gun Days, because in my training, I freely admit this. We talked earlier about what the Navy taught us and stuff like that, but it wasn't easy for me. I did fine at it. I wasn't number 1 in my class, but I was near the top, and clearly I had good enough grades to get through. But in that book, I admit, I got it down in a simulator, and I deserved it. I had a failing grade, and then anyway. I don't mind telling people that it was complex, demanding, but then I put these stories in at the end to show, well, eventually I did catch on, and I was able to be a good Rio. So, and then I wrote Tomcat Rio. That was my newest book.
Great book.
And for me, well, thanks. That was for me one of the most fun books to write, because I felt like I was representing myself. When I wrote Top Gun Days, I felt like I was representing the Top Gun squadron. And in Tomcat Rio, I loosened up a little bit. I wrote, a few more stories about parties and mistakes we made while flying and stuff like that. So, and in Tomcat Rio, I got the publisher to use bigger paper. So the pictures are much bigger. They look better. But also I read your book, and I think that it's got a lot more to it. You went a little further than I did. You explicitly drew out lessons from the cockpit, and I put a few things in mine, and I thought I might do more of that. When I started writing, I go, I'm just going to tell the story, and I'll let people draw their own conclusions. They can pull the lessons out. They're in there.
No, see, Simon & Schuster, when I first sent them the manuscript, I had the lessons in a different file.
Yeah.
And they went, "Where's the lessons learned? We're not publishing this without the lessons learned." I said, "Oh, well, here they are." And they said, "Okay, good." And off it went, and it's not going to be like one of J.K. Rowling's book. And I said, "I don't think it's going to be either," but it consistently sells. And I still get notes, and I'm sure you do too, which are really cool to get notes from people and read the reviews that say, hey, this book really moved me. This made me change the way I'm thinking about things. Okay.
Yes, that is very rewarding for an author to get those.
It really is. And so I'm happy that I did it. I had never thought about writing a book. And then finally I made my mind up to do it. And I did my whole manuscript in about 3-4 months. So did you ever get to fly against the Red Eagle, Bubbas?
Oh yeah. That's something that was declassified while I was writing my book. I wasn't comfortable with revealing that part of the story. So I did not mention it in my book. And for years, I still didn't talk about it until last year. I did a short video on YouTube, in my Tomcat Memories series about my flight. The first time I flew against them, we flew against a MiG-21, and it was all 1v1 visual setups. Then later, when I was a Top Gun student, we flew against them, and we did a visual and a performance demo against a MiG-23. And then we had a set, which was also 1v1. And then we had a second flight where we did 2v2 intercept to engagement against a MiG-23. And I got to tell you, those floggers were fast, super fast. They could not maneuver against the Tomcat. So, we got kills shortly after the merge.
And they
were very cool.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to see them?
No, we knew about it, particularly when I was at Kadena, because all the F-15 guys were cycling through the program, when they would go out for what they called WESP, combat archer, they'd sneak a couple rides in up there and against the 21 and the 23. And I knew about it, but didn't know the constant peg name or anything like that, but
man, it was a cool program.
Well, and look at the dividends that paid over the long run too. Now, not too long ago, a couple of years ago, some photographer published pictures of a 16 and a flanker going at each other over the top of the Nellis Range. Okay.
Yeah.
So program is alive and well, I guess.
Something's going on.
Something's going on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. The dividends that pays to be able to go up against an instructor who really, really knows adversary tactics, flying the airplane that you're going to face is incredible. And I think that's why our military is so good, because of the way we train.
Yes.
The way we train.
I agree with you. I hear people talk about flight hours. And of course, that's a very coarse measure. It's, there's quality flight hours, but there's a lot to be said for flight hours. And as long as our aviators, pilots and WIZOs and air crews and everybody get, a good level of flight hours and they have good high quality training, I just think that's very important. It really balances, things like quantity and various other things. So I always keep an eye on information like that whenever it's available, and I'm glad to see that other people are worried about that and keeping track of it, because it's important.
And you know what? When we were standing up our school, one of the things that we kept telling each other when we're working on the syllabus, and again, we're starting from a white sheet of paper, was train like you fight, fight like you train, train like you fight, fight like you train, train like you fight, fight like you train. All of us had heard that. All of us had heard that Top Gun moniker, that Top Gun motto. It saved us in many situations, Yeah. Hey, that's not the way we would employ this airplane. We're not going to include that. And
very good.
Thanks to you guys and train like you fight, fight like you train.
Well, and I've got to thank Sluggo. I think back, and I actually do think stuff like this sometimes. Those first guys that set up the first Top Gun squadron, and their names are known, Dan Peterson and his crew. They established these standards. I mean, they could have gone 100 different ways, but they set very high standards for themselves. They made each other stand to it. So they made each other meet the standards. And so, I mean, they got it right.
Yeah.
And as I said before, Air Force Fighter Weapons School, same thing. I think, both services had issues in the 60s. Eventually, everybody got on board and knew that they needed to do it correctly, as you talked about. So, Yep, we got to give those guys credit.
One of my favorite books is Scream of Eagles, that talks about the creation of Top Gun and what they had to go through, from their little trailer, what the school is now. And again, look what it's done.
I've read Scream of Eagles 2 or 3 times, and I get stuff out of it every time. I love it.
Absolutely.
I think I've told you all the stories I can tell.
Well, I tell you what, I'll ask you one question. And this one is a question that people go, ooh, wow. Looking back on your career, what would be your top 3 lessons learned that you would pass to a brand new nugget if you were standing in front of them?
Oh, that's it. That is a great question. I can tell you one right off because it's something I wish I had done different. I wish I had asked more stupid questions when I was a new guy. And by that, I mean things like going out to the airplane and asking the mechanics, the sailors, the airframers, the mechs, the electricians, what does that do? How does that work? Show me how that worked. I wish I had done that more. I did a very little bit of it, but not much. I studied my NATOPS and I thought, I knew enough, but I wish I had a deeper understanding. Another thing that I wish I had done differently is at points along the way, I wish I had asked my fellow officers more about themselves, because you're in a squadron in an F-14 squadron, there's 30 or more other pilots and RIOs, and a little bit about them, where they're from, where they went to college and stuff. I realized there were a lot of things I didn't know about them, and I kind of wish I did. So I don't know if I can come up with a third thing, because I feel very fortunate the way my career turned out.
Well, I noticed what you have on the back of your chair. CO.
Yeah. When you leave the squadron, your ready room chair that has CO and your call sign, the squadron doesn't want that anymore. So they gave it to me and I put it on my office chair here and it fit. Yeah.
As the skipper of an F-14 squadron, what would be some of the leadership lessons you'd give to some of your aviators now if you were standing in front of them?
Well, that's a tough one for me because I had not flown for quite a few years when I was selected to go back in command. So I had a lot of catching up to do. But that is one of the cases where I wish I had asked my junior officers more about themselves specifically, because I had a general sense of each person, but I'm sitting there going like, man, I wish I had known, this. On the other hand, I'm going to take credit for something I did. I got to know our enlisted men and women fairly well, and that was a result of reading a complaint. When I joined the squadron as XO, see in the Navy, you join as the XO, and then after 12 to 18 months, you become the CO for another 12 to 18 months. And so it's a fleet up or rotation like that, which I think is a great system. And when I arrived as XO, they had just taken what was called a command climate survey, where the sailors just get to complain and everybody gets to read all their inputs. They're all anonymous. And I read this one that said, the CO doesn't even know who I am. I worked so hard for him and for our squadron, and he doesn't know who I am. So I took that on board, and I tried to get to know a lot of our sailors and talk to them on a regular level. So I think I did that well. And I guess that's something I would tell junior people, get to know your people.
But see, that carries over into business really well, because I went into the corporate world after I left the military, and I had some leaders that had no idea who I was or who I knew and what I knew.
Yeah.
And I had one guy come up to me and actually tell me, you need to do what I tell you, because I've been here longer than you have while we're trying to figure out what to put in a cockpit. And I turned around and I looked at him. I said, when you have 5,000 hours and multiple jet engine airframes, you'll have some street cred with me. Okay, Steve? And he looked at me like he was just shocked that I would even say that to him.
Yeah.
I said, do you have any idea what my background is, Steve? Who I am, what I've done? Not only did he not care, he just blew it off. Okay.
Oh, even after you told him? Oh, well.
Yeah, even after I told him that. And,
wow.
And I just kind of went, okay, well, that's the way it's going to be, I guess,
Some people.
Yeah. But I was made a systems engineering manager, and I don't have a systems engineering degree, but I found out every one of the 12 guys and gals that work for me a little bit about their background. And it was huge because I could say, oh, he's got background in that. He would be really good for this project.
Yep.
And I think that was one of the things that I learned from being a systems engineering manager, not for very long, but again, 12 people under me, finding out, hey, what's your background? What do you like to do? One guy loved woodworking, and as a matter of fact, has left the systems engineering world and is now a full-time woodworker in his garage.
Oh, nice.
That was one of the things, when we put together the team to run tankers over Iraq for the Shotgun campaign.
Yeah.
Every person on my team was somebody I had intimate working relationship with. And we got together. We came together and worked together famously. And it was a thing of beauty, but that was only because I'd known who these people were and had spent time with them and understood their capabilities.
There's a lot to be said for that. Yep.
Isn't there? Well, brother, thanks. Thanks for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me. When we talked about this, and I thought back about your book and thought about your podcast and stuff, I go, this is going to be a little bit different, and because you do bring in this real world application and stuff like that. So I've enjoyed talking about it with that in mind.
And I'm going to put a link to Amazon to all three of your books in the show notes. Okay.
Oh, thanks. Okay.
And this has, talking with you and seeing your CO cover in the background, man, you were a part of a famous squadron. You were the CO of a very famous squadron, 211. Holy smokes.
Oh, the Checkmates. Yeah, they've been around a while. They've got some history. Yes.
Well, I see on one of your helmets in the background, the red Renegade check mark. Is that right?
Well, this is from my first squadron, VF-24.
Yeah, that's what I thought. The Renegades, right?
Yes.
See, you were in some.
This is 211, my last helmet. But I don't put it on because the liner is starting to dry rot and it leaves stuff on my head.
So I was at Oceana in 2003 when 211 was transitioning from Tomcats to the Super Hornets. Yes. And I have a picture somewhere of F-14s on one row and F-18s on another row, all painted in 211 markings.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's a very cool picture.
That was a really interesting time to see, out with the old, in with the new.
Oh,
and of course, 211 had been over to the Gulf numerous times after 9/11 doing certain things. So
flying their old F-14A models.
Yeah, flying the F-14A models. But you know what? They're carrying the Lantern pod. We talked about dropping bombs, carrying the Lantern pod and 4 GBU-12s, smacking down caves and bad guys and things. I mean, it was really something.
That gave the F-14 10 more years of useful service. So that Lantern pod was just great. Yeah.
And looking back on some of that, because every night at the map cell meeting, we would show the greatest hits over Kandahar or the greatest hits over Baghdad.
Cool.
And of course, we had a lot of F-14 Lantern pod video that would come to us. That was fantastic stuff. So anyway.
Good.
All right, brother. Thanks again for being with me today and the Lessons from the Cockpit show. And like I said, I'll link to your books on Amazon so that people can just click on there and go right to them. All right.
Well, thanks. And be sure to let me know when you put this up, and I'll put it out on my network so you can get some more viewers.
Okay. Be up next week. We're going to do this one next week. Okay.
All right.
All right. Folks, this is what this show is all about. Talking to people like Dave Baranek, bio, and hearing all these things about being at Top Gun. Can you imagine coming in and going, hey, you guys are going to be in a movie? How surreal would that be? Particularly one that nobody expected to do well and becomes one of the most iconic movies about aviation during the 80s. Thanks to all of my listeners once again for downloading this episode and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast, which can be found on my website at markcasera.com. I hope all of you had a great holidays. I really do appreciate all of you downloading and listening to episodes of Lessons from the Cockpit. We're almost at 10,000 downloads, which is pretty good considering I've only been doing this for a year, and I'm hearing more and more from people around the world that are listening to my podcast. This and previous episodes of the Lessons from the Cockpit podcast can be found at my website, markcasera.com, under the podcast pull-down box. The Lessons from the Cockpit show is financially supported in all that we do, from Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. I want all of you to go to wallpilot.com and take a look at some of the ready-to-print. I think there's 127 ready-to-print profiles there. They're extremely detailed. They've even got the arming handles on the Sidewinder missiles with the stenciling. We do a lot of research when we start drawing and constructing these airplanes. We do it all in Adobe Illustrator. And of course, we do custom orders too. We did a 30-footer for one of our customers. So please go order one or two of our graphics. Or if you really have an airplane you want on your wall, we can do custom orders also with your name, weapons load, unit emblems, tail number on a custom print. I'm working on helicopters now. I don't know a lot about helicopters. I have two custom customers for helicopters, but you'll see those up pretty soon. The SH-3 Sea King and the Apache attack helicopter. Folks, thanks for tuning in and listening today to this episode with Bio. Links to his books on Amazon will be in the show notes, and we'll look forward to talking to you again next week on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.